I was misdiagnosed. I probably contracted Lyme disease over 2 decades ago, and I was tested 4 different times. Every test came back negative. Finally, after the 4th negative test, about 11 days later, at that point I was so ill, I begged a doctor for antibiotics, and he retested me that 5th time, and it came up positive. In fact, I think his exact words were, "I was off the charts." Before I would get that final diagnosis, I unfortunately had a seizure in the middle of a trial. I lost my ability to speak, lost use of my limbs, and I found out later that I had passed Lyme disease to my son in utero. We have just successfully in Virginia and Maryland, and I believe it's passed in Delaware, passed laws requiring doctors and/or labs to disseminate patient information disclosure sheets advising the patients that the test for Lyme disease is over 60% false negative. Can you imagine a test that's wrong more than it's right? And so people don't know that, and in fact doctors are frequently unaware of that fact. And so when the doctor tests patients, they say to the patient, "If I don't call you, you're fine." And then the patient never gets a call back, so he figures, "I'm not sick." But the fact of the matter is, it takes weeks for antibodies to develop. In addition to that, there are studies that show some people are never going to test positive. And so myself along with NatCapLyme, Monty Skull, Executive Director of NatCapLyme, we have been successful in our bid to require states to notify patients of the inefficacy of the test, so that they're told if you test negative, it doesn't mean that you don't have Lyme disease, and if your symptoms persist, you should return for further treatment. And had this bill been the law when I got sick, perhaps none of my symptoms would have ever happened. One of the biggest challenges as they're getting sick, they've already been told they don't have Lyme disease. So now they're getting diagnoses like you have fibromyalgia, you have chronic fatigue syndrome. And then as the disease progresses and goes to their central nervous system, they're told, well, you have an imperfect form of MS, ALS, Parkinson's. And so these people are being treated for those diseases, even though the fact of the matter is the origin in many cases is Lyme. It's also, we've seen recently Chris Christopherson was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when in fact he also had Lyme disease. So the first problem is finding a doctor who can diagnose you. Secondarily, historically, the old guidelines said that Lyme was hard to catch, easy to cure, 28 days of antibiotics, and you were all better. Those guidelines were known as the Infectious Disease Society of America's guidelines. Those guidelines are carried by the CDC as well on their website. So as a result, insurance companies generally refuse to cover any kind of treatment beyond 28 days. Many people who have a chronic form of Lyme or persistent Lyme wind up getting treated with antibiotics for months, if not years. And so none of that's covered because of these old guidelines. The guidelines of the IDSA they're very old, they're antiquated, they're not compliant with the Institute of Medicine's requirements for guidelines, and thus this year they were taken down from the National Guideline Clearinghouse Registry. The only guidelines now that are in existence on that registry are the ILADS, International Lyme and Associated Disease Society guidelines, which call for longer-term treatment. However, having said that, the CDC is still, for some unknown reason, promoting the guidelines that have been removed by the agency that wrote them. And they're still sticking to that 28-day limit. And therefore, people have to pay out of pocket. And it's financially devastating. Families, people are losing their homes, marriages are breaking up. It's a terrible thing. And when there are children involved, it's the worst thing you could ever imagine. I know of families that have been completely financially ruined trying to treat themselves or their children. I've been contacted by many other states who want to bring that bill in their state so that their civilians, their citizens know as well that the test is inaccurate. I mean, for me it's a no-brainer. That disclaimer is written on many of the lab sheets that go to the doctors in such tiny print The doctors don't read it, they're busy. So what they do is they see Lyme negative and they call the patient and say you don't have it. The doctors need to be educated. The patients need to be educated. And so that's why, you know, at National Capital Lyme Organization, we're so grateful for shows like yours that are advising the public. There's no test for Lyme disease, and there's currently no cure for late-stage Lyme disease. And so they need to see a doctor. The sooner they get intervention, the better off they're going to be. We have support groups that we have them from DC, Virginia, all the way down to North Carolina, Maryland, and we regularly have meetings and speakers. And we are constantly trying to educate the public and spread awareness. We even have actually an education program that we're promoting for schools that will teach children how to find ticks and what it means, what they should do if they do find a tick. Lyme should be a clinical diagnosis. Even the CDC says that you should not rely on the Lyme test. Having said that, there is a biorepository that has been, that is the gold standard biorepository in the country down at Johns Hopkins under Dr. John Alcott is the head of that program. And what they found was they took people who had bullseye rashes, EM rashes, which is a prima facie case of Lyme. They enrolled them in the program, and at the time that they were enrolled, they took fluids from their bodies, including blood, urine, they took spinal column fluid, they took fluid, every kind of fluid they could take, and skin samples. And they tested the people upon enrollment, and over 60% of them tested negative. Of the cohort of patients that tested negative, they retested them after a round of treatment about 8 weeks out. And some of those people converted seropositive, but many did not. And in fact, they found that women and men's IgG, IgM, in other words, our immune systems, operate differently. So more women than men did not convert positive. Why is that? Well, there are a number of reasons. The assay for Lyme disease includes, there are so many species of this bacteria. And in fact, the Mayo Clinic several months ago just discovered a new species. Kerry Clark discovered 2 new species down in Florida. So the assay that tests for reactivity does not include those species of the bacteria. There are many more species we're sure that will emerge that haven't even been contemplated yet. So if you were to be infected with one of those species, you're never going to react to that assay, and therefore you're not going to be diagnosed positive. Furthermore, I should tell you that the test for Lyme disease is intended only for CDC surveillance survey criteria only. That's a mouthful, right? What that means basically is the CDC said, we know this test isn't accurate, but we're going to use it for counting purposes. So, you know, it was never meant to be used as a diagnostic tool. Unfortunately, insurance companies are using it as the final arbiter of whether or not you have Lyme disease. Read as much as you can about this disease. The symptoms are so they're diverse, and everybody is going to be affected differently depending on the co-infections, depending on genetic issues, and depending on their immune systems. So make yourself as aware as possible. If you have an unexplained illness and you're going from doctor to doctor and they can't figure it out, do not be fooled by the myths that this is a northeastern disease. This disease is in every state in the country, and you will often find mainstream medicine doctors who will tell you, oh, don't worry about that, we don't have that here, that's a northeastern disease. It is not selectively a northeastern disease. Be aware of your symptoms. If you can't find a diagnosis that's straight up for your conditions, I strongly recommend that you get in touch with a Lyme literate medical doctor and have them evaluate your situation. I can tell you in my other life as an attorney, I regularly get calls regarding misdiagnosis of Lyme, and more we're seeing such unbelievable stories about people who so obviously had Lyme disease and were told they didn't have it by their doctors, and the delay in treatment has caused them severe damages. I can tell you that I lost a very close friend about 3 or 4 weeks ago. He died from Lyme disease, complications arising out of Lyme disease, and there's not a day that goes by pretty much anymore that somebody doesn't die on my Facebook page from Lyme disease. And suicide is very high in our community, and the reason for that being they don't have access to medical care. They don't have access to treatment or coverage. They become so helpless, and they can't get what they need to get better. Finally, the pain and the isolation consumes them, and we see people regularly committing suicide, and it's tragic. It is so tragic. There are a number of cases that come to mind. We lost a young child in Virginia this year. The child had 3 tick attachments when he went to the doctor. He had 3 bullseye rashes, and the doctor gave him a limited amount of antibiotics. Mom went back as the child got sicker, and begged for more antibiotics, and they said, nope, he doesn't have Lyme anymore. And when they retested his blood, it came up negative. They obviously didn't know that a negative test did not mean that the kid was not suffering from Lyme disease, and that baby died. And we had another child that was misdiagnosed, and he had Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and the doctors never thought about it until it was too late. We see a lot of it. When people have a classic bullseye rash, take a picture of it. Make sure you keep that picture, because that can be important. We know one mother who ultimately got the diagnosis probably 20 doctors down the road and way too late to save her daughter's health. But at least she had that bullseye rash to be able to show that that was what she originally presented with. Too many doctors. We know of one infectious disease doctor who heads a department in Virginia who turned a patient away who had a positive test and a bullseye rash, and he said, we don't have Lyme down here, so it's a mistake. North Carolina, the former director of the health department used to say they had ticks down there, but their ticks don't bite people. They had the only vegan gourmet ticks in the country, although I think Palm Beach, Florida also said the same thing. There is an interesting bill that was just passed in Massachusetts. It was unique in that so many members of the General Assembly had Lyme disease, but they did just pass a bill in Massachusetts requiring insurance companies, when a doctor says that the extended antibiotics are medically necessary and reasonable, it's going to require insurance companies to pay for that treatment. Now, I think it's headed for the governor's desk, so it's not actually law yet. But obviously that's a cause we're very interested in, and we hope to pick up shortly. I suppose the most important thing is to catch it to make sure you don't catch it. So to be aware, teach your children, do tick checks. When your kids come in from being outside, get them in a shower, do a full tick check, get their clothes in a hot washer and a hot dryer to make sure that any ticks that they're carrying are killed. Use repellents, and just be really conscientious about checking your loved ones and treating your dogs or your cats if they're outdoors, because if you can prevent catching it, obviously that's the most important thing. Secondarily, the other thing I would tell you, if you find a tick on you, save the tick. It can be tested by a laboratory. You can find out what the tick is carrying, whether it be Lyme disease or co-infections. Co-infections need to be treated differently than Lyme disease.